I never thought a rubber mat could bring down an entire homeowners association. But here I am, 6 months later, watching the former HOA president get led away in handcuffs. My name is Vincent Lawson, and I bought my house in Maple Ridge, Colorado, about 3 years ago. It is a nice suburban development just outside Denver, with neat lawns, 2-car garages, and the kind of neighbors who wave at you when you check your mailbox. When I moved in, the HOA seemed reasonable enough. $20 a month for snow removal on the main roads, maintenance of the community park, and keeping the entrance looking presentable. I could live with that. The problem started last November when the first real snow hit. Colorado winters are no joke, and my driveway is steep and faces north, meaning it stays icy well into spring. I am not an old man, just turned 35, but I had already slipped twice trying to get to my car for work. The second time, I nearly cracked my head open on the concrete. That is when I decided I needed a solution. I researched heated driveway systems, the permanent kind with cables installed under the pavement. The quotes came back between $15,000 and $20,000. I had just bought the house and was still recovering financially from the down payment, so that was not happening anytime soon. Then I found heated driveway mats online. They were portable rubber mats that plugged into an outdoor outlet designed specifically for melting snow and ice. Perfect. They cost me about $800 for enough to cover the main walking path and the area where I parked my car. The mats arrived in early December, and I set them up on a particularly cold Saturday morning. They were black rubber, textured for traction, and had electrical cords that ran to my garage outlet. Within an hour of turning them on, the snow started melting. By that evening, I had a completely clear path to my front door and around my car. I felt like a genius. Monday morning, I was drinking coffee and getting ready for work when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a woman in her late 40s with blonde hair styled in that particular way that screams, "Let me speak to your manager." She wore a puffy white jacket and held a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Good morning," I said, trying to be friendly. "Can I help you?" "I am Barbara Hutchins, president of the Maple Ridge HOA," she announced, her voice sharp. "I need to discuss a violation with you." I blinked. "A violation of what?" "Those," she said, pointing at my heated mats with an expression like I had mounted a neon sign to my roof. "Those rubber things in your driveway, they are not approved." I looked at my mats, then back at her. "They are just heated mats, for the ice." "They are unapproved modifications to your property's exterior appearance," Barbara said, consulting her clipboard. "According to Section 7, Article 3 of our HOA covenants, all exterior modifications must be submitted to the Architectural Review Committee for approval before installation." "But they are not modifications," I said, trying to stay calm. "They are temporary mats. I can remove them whenever I want." "That is irrelevant. They alter the appearance of your property as viewed from the street. I am going to have to issue you a citation and a $50 fine." "You have 14 days to remove them." $50. "For trying not to break my neck on ice." Barbara's expression hardened. "The rules apply to everyone, Mr. Lawson. That is what maintains property values. If we let everyone just put whatever they want in their yards and driveways, this neighborhood would look like a flea market. They are black mats on a black driveway. You can barely even see them." "I can see them just fine." 14 days. She handed me a violation notice from her clipboard, turned on her heel, and walked back to her silver SUV parked at the curb. I stood there in my doorway, holding the notice and feeling my blood pressure rise. This was insane. I went inside and immediately called my neighbor, Tom, who had lived in Maple Ridge for almost a decade. He laughed when I told him what happened. "Yeah, Barbara is intense about the rules," Tom said. "Last year she fined the Hendersons because their Christmas lights were the wrong shade of white. Apparently we are only allowed pure white, not warm white." "You are kidding." I wish I was. My advice, just keep your head down and do not give her ammunition. But I could not just take the mats up. The ice was not going anywhere and neither was winter. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting, which was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the community center. The Maple Ridge Community Center was a small building near the entrance of the neighborhood, mostly used for HOA meetings and the occasional resident birthday party. When I arrived at 7 o'clock, about 20 people were already seated in folding chairs facing a table at the front. Barbara sat in the middle chair, flanked by two other board members I had never met. A man in his 60s with a gray beard sat to her right, and a younger woman, maybe in her 30s, sat to her left. I took a seat in the back and waited. The meeting started with Barbara going through the usual business, reading minutes from the last meeting, discussing the budget for landscaping at the entrance, and debating whether to repair or replace the community park's playground equipment. Finally, she opened the floor for resident concerns. I raised my hand. "Yes, Vincent," Barbara said, her tone suggesting she had been expecting this. I stood up. "I want to talk about the violation I received for my heated driveway mats." Several people turned to look at me. Barbara folded her hands on the table. "What about it?" "I think the violation is unreasonable. The mats are a safety device and they are temporary. I am not permanently modifying anything." "The rules are clear," Barbara said. "Exterior modifications require approval. You did not seek approval, because they are not modifications. If I put a garden hose in my driveway, would that need approval too? A garden hose is not a permanent fixture left out for extended periods. Neither are the mats. I can roll them up and store them in my garage any time." The man with the gray beard leaned forward. "I am Gerald, Vice President. The issue is not just about permanent versus temporary. It is about maintaining a cohesive aesthetic. If you can put out heated mats, then someone else might put out bright orange traffic cones or paint their driveway purple. We have to draw a line somewhere. But I am not trying to make a statement. I am trying not to slip on ice." The younger woman, who introduced herself as Deanne, the secretary, spoke up. "Could you not just use salt or sand? Salt damages concrete and plants, and sand is messy and does not actually melt the ice. The mats are specifically designed for this purpose." Barbara cut in. "This is not a debate. The rules exist for a reason. If you want to use those mats, you need to submit a formal application to the Architectural Review Committee. We will review it and make a decision within 30 days. 30 days. Winter will be half over by then. Then you should have thought of that before installing them without permission." I could feel my frustration mounting, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Fine. What do I need to do to submit an application?" Barbara slid a piece of paper across the table. "Fill this out, include photographs of the proposed installation, and pay the $50 application fee. There is a fee just to apply, standard procedure." I took the paper, thanked her through gritted teeth, and left the meeting. When I got home, I read through the application. It was 3 pages long, asking for detailed descriptions, measurements, materials, colors, and even the manufacturer's specifications for rubber mats. I spent the next evening filling it out, taking photos from every angle and printing out the product information from the website where I bought them. I mailed the application with a check for $50 the next day. 2 weeks passed, then 3, then 4. Every time I checked my mailbox, there was nothing from the HOA. Meanwhile, the snow kept falling and my mats kept working perfectly. I left them in place, figuring that since I had submitted the application, I was at least showing good faith. Wrong. In mid-January, I came home from work to find another violation notice taped to my front door. This one was for $100 and stated that I had failed to comply with the original citation. A second notice followed a week later, this time for $200, and included a warning that if I did not remove the mats immediately, the HOA would pursue legal action. I called the HOA office number listed on the notices and got Barbara's voicemail. I left a message asking about the status of my application. She did not call back. I left 2 more messages over the next few days. Nothing. Finally, I showed up at the HOA office during the listed business hours on a Saturday morning. The office was inside the community center, a small room with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a wilting plant. Barbara was there, typing on a laptop. "I need to know what is happening with my application," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Barbara barely looked up. "It is under review." "It has been over a month. The committee meets when they meet." "Who is on the committee?" "That is confidential." "How can it be confidential? I live here. I pay HOA fees." Barbara finally met my eyes. "The committee is comprised of board members and selected residents who volunteer their time. They review applications carefully to ensure compliance with community standards. Your application is in the queue. So, when will I get an answer?" "When the committee makes a decision." This was going nowhere. I have already received 3 violation notices and $450 in fines for something I applied for permission to use. Does that seem fair to you? You installed them without permission. The fines are valid. Even though I am trying to go through your process, the process exists to prevent people from doing exactly what you did, installing first and asking permission later. I wanted to scream, but instead, I took a deep breath. Can I at least attend a committee meeting to present my case in person? Committee meetings are closed. Of course they are. I left before I said something I would regret. When I got home, I did what I should have done weeks ago. I pulled out the HOA covenants, the actual legal documents I had received when I bought the house, and read through them carefully. The rules were vague, as these things often are. Section 7, Article 3 did mention that exterior modifications required approval, but the definition of modification was broad and open to interpretation. It included things like fences, sheds, paint colors, and landscaping changes. But there was nothing specific about temporary items, and the word permanent appeared several times in the context of structures. I also noticed something interesting. There was a provision in Section 12 that allowed homeowners to install safety devices without prior approval, as long as they met certain criteria. It specifically mentioned handrails, lighting, and security equipment. It was not a huge leap to argue that heated mats designed to prevent falls on ice were also safety devices. Armed with this information, I decided to consult a lawyer. I found a local attorney named Richard Chen who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Denver, a small suite in an older building. Richard was in his 40s, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt, and he listened to my story with the air of someone who had heard it all before. "HOAs can be tricky," Richard said when I finished. "They have a lot of power, but they are not above the law. The key question is whether your covenants actually prohibit what you are doing." That is what I thought. The safety device exception seems relevant. Richard nodded. "It is a good argument, but here is the thing. Even if you are legally in the right, fighting an HOA can be expensive and time-consuming. They have money from everyone's dues, and they can drag things out. You need to decide if this is a hill you are willing to die on." I already paid them $50 just to apply for permission. Now they are fining me hundreds of dollars for something I am not even sure they can legally prohibit. At what point do I stand up for myself? That is a fair point. Here is what I recommend. I will draft a letter to the HOA on your behalf, citing the safety device provision and requesting that they withdraw the fines and approve your application. It will cost you $250 for me to write it. If they do not respond or if they escalate, we can discuss further action. Do it. Richard had the letter ready in 3 days. It was professional, citing the specific sections of the covenants and making a clear legal argument. He sent it certified mail so we would know when Barbara received it. She signed for it on a Tuesday. By Friday, I had a response also by certified mail. I opened it with a mix of hope and dread. The letter was short. The HOA rejected my application on the grounds that the heated mats were aesthetically incompatible with the community's appearance standards and posed an unspecified electrical hazard. The fines would stand, and I had 7 days to remove the mats or face additional penalties and potential legal action. I called Richard immediately. "They are making things up now," I said. "Electrical hazard. They are all listed products designed for outdoor use." "That is a weak argument on their part," Richard agreed. "But it tells me they are not interested in being reasonable. If you want to fight this, we will need to file a lawsuit." "How much are we talking?" "Initial filing and my fees, probably $3,000. Could go higher if it drags on. But here is the good news. If we win, we can request that the court order them to pay your legal fees. Colorado law allows that in HOA disputes if the HOA acted unreasonably." I thought about it for a long moment. $3,000 was a lot of money. But so was $450 in fines for doing nothing wrong, and the principle of the thing was starting to matter more than the money. Let's do it. Richard filed the lawsuit in late February. The case was Vincent Lawson v. Maple Ridge Homeowners Association, filed in the Jefferson County District Court. We argued that the HOA had violated its own covenants by failing to properly define what constituted an exterior modification, by arbitrarily rejecting a reasonable safety device, and by imposing fines without proper procedure. The HOA hired a lawyer, a guy named Preston Mercer from a firm that specialized in defending HOAs. Preston was everything you would expect: expensive suit, slicked back hair, and an attitude that suggested he was doing me a favor by even acknowledging my existence. The first hearing was in early April. Winter was finally loosening its grip on Colorado, but my mats were still down because I was not about to give Barbara the satisfaction of removing them before the court made a ruling. Judge Ellen Krakowski presided. She was in her late 50s, with a no-nonsense demeanor and a reputation for being fair but tough. Richard and I sat at one table, Preston and Barbara at the other. Preston argued first, claiming that the HOA had broad authority to regulate exterior appearances and that my mats were an eyesore that could set a bad precedent. He made it sound like I was trying to park a rusted school bus in my driveway. Richard countered with our safety device argument and pointed out that the covenants were vague and that the HOA had failed to follow its own procedures in handling my application. Judge Krakowski listened carefully, asked a few pointed questions, and then said she would take the matter under advisement. That meant we had to wait for her written decision, which could take weeks. In the meantime, life went on. The HOA continued sending me violation notices, now up to $500 in fines. I ignored them. My neighbors started taking sides. Some people thought I was being a troublemaker. Others, especially those who had their own run-ins with Barbara quietly cheered me on. Tom brought me a six-pack of beer one evening and told me he hoped I won. "Someone needs to stand up to her," he said. "She acts like she owns the whole neighborhood." The judge's decision came back in late May. She ruled partially in my favor. The decision stated that the heated mats qualified as a safety device under Section 12 of the Covenants, and that the HOA had overstepped its authority in prohibiting them outright. However, she also ruled that the HOA had the right to impose reasonable aesthetic standards, and that I should have sought approval before installing them. The practical outcome was that the HOA had to allow me to keep the mats, but I had to pay a reduced fine of $100 for failing to get prior approval. The other $550 in fines were vacated. The HOA also had to reimburse me for the $50 application fee and pay $2,000 toward my legal fees. It was not a total victory, but it was close enough. Richard was pleased. "This is a good ruling," he said. "It sets a precedent that the HOA cannot just arbitrarily reject safety equipment, and getting most of your legal fees covered is huge." I paid the $100 fine and figured that was the end of it. It was not. Barbara did not take the loss well. At the next HOA meeting in June, she announced that the board was proposing an amendment to the covenants to explicitly prohibit any temporary electrical devices in driveways, including heated mats. The amendment would require a vote of the homeowners, and she was pushing hard for it. I attended that meeting, along with about 30 other residents. The turnout was higher than usual, and I suspected word had gotten around about the lawsuit. "This amendment is necessary to maintain our community standards," Barbara said, standing at the front of the room with her usual clipboard. "We cannot have people running electrical cords all over their driveways. It is unsightly and potentially dangerous." A man in the front row raised his hand. But the judge said the mats were allowed as a safety device. Would not this amendment be trying to overturn a court ruling? "The judge's ruling was specific to the current covenants," Barbara said. "We have the right to amend them as we see fit." Another woman spoke up. "I have heated mats too. I installed them after Vincent won his case. Are you going to fine me now?" Barbara's face tightened. "If this amendment passes, yes, everyone will need to comply." The debate went on for over an hour. People were surprisingly passionate about it. Some sided with Barbara, arguing that rules were important and that exceptions led to chaos. Others pointed out that safety should come first, and that Barbara seemed more interested in control than in actually helping the community. Finally, Gerald, the vice president, suggested that the vote be delayed until the next meeting to give people more time to consider it. Barbara reluctantly agreed. Over the next month, I talked to as many neighbors as I could. I explained my side, showed them the mats, and pointed out that the amendment was not really about safety or aesthetics. It was about Barbara wanting to punish me for challenging her authority. Most people were reasonable once they understood the full story. A few were not. One guy, a middle-aged accountant named Jeff, told me I was ruining the neighborhood and that I should just move if I did not like the rules. I told Jeff he was free to slip on ice all he wanted, but I was not going to. The vote was held at the July meeting. The turnout was the highest I had ever seen. Nearly 60 homeowners packed into the community center. The room was hot and tense. Barbara presented the amendment one more time, reading from a prepared statement about community standards and safety concerns. Then the floor was opened for discussion. I stood up. "I just want to say one thing," I began. "This amendment is not about improving the neighborhood. It is about one person trying to control everyone else. The judge already ruled that heated mats are allowed. If we pass this amendment, We are just inviting another lawsuit, and this time the HOA will lose and cost all of us even more money in legal fees. Is that really what we want? Several people nodded. A woman named Paula, who I had spoken with a few days earlier, stood up and said, "I agree with Vincent. I think this whole thing has been blown out of proportion. Let people make their own decisions about how to keep their driveways safe." The debate went back and forth for another 30 minutes. Finally, Barbara called for the vote. Homeowners could vote in person or by proxy. The amendment needed a 2/3 majority to pass. The votes were tallied by Diane, the secretary, while everyone waited in anxious silence. Finally, she handed the results to Barbara. Barbara looked at the paper and her face went pale. "The amendment has failed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 38 votes against, 22 in favor. A few people clapped. Barbara slammed her clipboard on the table and stormed out of the room. Gerald and Diane exchanged uncomfortable glances. I felt a wave of relief. It was over. Or so I thought. The next morning I woke up to find that someone had spray painted the word traitor in red letters across my driveway, right over my heated mats. I stood there in my pajamas, coffee in hand, staring at the vandalism in disbelief. I called the police. An officer arrived within 20 minutes, took photos, and wrote up a report. He asked if I had any idea who might have done it. "I have suspicions," I said, "but no proof." The officer nodded. "Looks like someone is pretty upset with you. You should consider installing a security camera." I took his advice. That afternoon, I bought a doorbell camera and 2 additional outdoor cameras from a home improvement store. One pointed at the driveway, one at the front door, and the doorbell camera covered the porch. I installed them myself and linked them to my phone. 2 nights later, at around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I groggily checked the camera feed and saw a figure in a dark hoodie approaching my driveway, carrying what looked like a can of spray paint. I jumped out of bed, pulled on shoes, and ran outside, flipping on the porch light. The figure froze, then bolted. I got a glimpse of a woman with blonde hair before she disappeared around the corner. I did not chase her, but I did not need to. The camera had caught everything. I downloaded the footage and watched it several times. The woman's face was partially visible in one frame when she looked up at the motion-activated light. It was Barbara. I called the police again. The same officer from before came out, watched the footage, and sighed. "That is definitely vandalism. Do you want to press charges?" "Yes." The officer took a copy of the footage and said someone from the detective division would follow up. 3 days later, 2 detectives showed up at my door. They asked me to walk them through everything: the lawsuit, the amendment vote, the first spray painting, and the camera footage. I showed them everything. One of the detectives, a woman named Laura Chen, said, "We will need to talk to Miss Hutchins. If this is her on the video, she will likely be charged with criminal mischief and possibly harassment." "I just want it to stop," I said. "We will do our best." The detectives went to Barbara's house that afternoon. I was not there, obviously, but I heard about it later from Tom, who lived across the street from her. Apparently, Barbara denied everything at first, but when the detectives showed her the video, she broke down and admitted it. She claimed she was under stress and that I had ruined her reputation in the neighborhood. Barbara was arrested and charged with 2 counts of criminal mischief. She was released on bail the same day, but the damage was done. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone knew that the HOA president had been arrested for vandalizing a resident's property. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Barbara as president. Gerald took over as interim president, and Diane became interim vice president. Barbara resigned from the board entirely and stopped showing up at meetings. But the story did not end there. In early September, a forensic accountant was brought in to review the HOA's finances as part of a routine audit that had been scheduled months earlier. What they found was shocking. Barbara had been embezzling money from the HOA for over 2 years. Small amounts at first, $100 here, $200 there, disguised as reimbursements for HOA expenses. But over time, it had added up to nearly $30,000. The accountant found fake receipts, inflated expense reports, and even payments to a landscaping company that did not exist. Barbara had been using the money to fund a gambling habit. She had racked up massive debts at a casino in Black Hawk, about an hour from Denver, and had been using HOA funds to cover her losses. The board immediately contacted the police, and this time the charges were serious. Barbara was arrested again, this time for felony theft and fraud. Her bail was set at $50,000 and she could not make it. She sat in jail while the case moved forward. The neighborhood was in shock. People who had supported Barbara, who had defended her strict enforcement of the rules, felt betrayed. Suddenly, all those fines and violation notices seemed less about maintaining standards and more about a power trip from someone who was robbing us all blind. The case went to trial in November. I was called to testify, not about the embezzlement, but about the harassment and vandalism. I told the court about the spray painting, the camera footage, and the arrest. The prosecutor used it to establish a pattern of behavior, showing that Barbara was willing to break the law when she did not get her way. The jury found her guilty on all counts. In December, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, though everyone knew we would never see most of that money. The HOA held a special election in January to choose a new board. Gerald and Diane were both re-elected, and 3 new members were added, including Paula, the woman who had spoken up in support of me during the amendment vote. The new board immediately set about reforming the rules, making them clearer and less arbitrary. They also instituted better financial oversight to prevent anything like Barbara's embezzlement from happening again. As for me, my heated driveway mats are still down every winter, working perfectly. My driveway is always clear, and I have not slipped on ice once. A few other neighbors have bought their own mats, and no one has said a word about it. I ran into Gerald at the community park last month. He apologized for everything that had happened, saying that the board should have reined in Barbara years ago, but that everyone had just assumed she knew what she was doing. She was so confident, Gerald said. We trusted her. That was our mistake. People make mistakes, I said. The important thing is that it got fixed. Thanks to you. If you had not fought back, who knows how long she would have kept stealing from us. I did not feel like a hero. I just felt like a guy who wanted to keep his driveway safe and ended up uncovering something much bigger. But I guess that is how these things go sometimes. You stand up for something small, something that seems insignificant, and it turns into something that matters. My house in Maple Ridge is still my home. The neighborhood is quieter now, less tense. People seem friendlier, more willing to talk to each other instead of worrying about breaking some obscure rule. The community park got new playground equipment, funded in part by recovering some of the embezzled money from Barbara's assets. Kids play there every afternoon, and their laughter echoes through the streets. I still see the spray paint stains on my driveway sometimes, faint but visible if you know where to look. I thought about having them professionally removed, but I decided to leave them. They remind me that standing up for yourself is not always easy, and it does not always make you popular, but it is worth it. Tom and I have become good friends. We have a standing Wednesday night poker game, and he still brings beer. We do not talk about Barbara much anymore. There is no point. She is gone, paying for her crimes, and life has moved on. Last week, a new family moved in 2 houses down from me. They have a couple of kids and a dog, and they seem nice. I introduced myself and welcomed them to the neighborhood. The husband asked me about the HOA, whether it was strict or laid back. "It is pretty reasonable now," I said. "Just follow the basic rules and you will be fine. And if you ever have a problem, talk to the board. They actually listen these days." He seemed relieved. I did not tell him the whole story. Maybe someday, over a beer, I will. But for now, it is enough to know that things are better. Winter is coming again, and I already have my mats ready to go in the garage. They are a little worn from 3 years of use, but they still work great. I will plug them in when the first snow falls, and my driveway will be clear and safe, just like it should be. And if anyone has a problem with it, well, they know where to find me. But I do not think they will. The neighborhood learned its lesson. Rules are important, but they are not more important than people. They are not more important than safety, common sense, or basic decency. Barbara forgot that. She thought power meant control, that being in charge meant making everyone else fall in line. She was wrong, and she paid the price. I think about her sometimes, sitting in a prison cell in Sterling, Colorado, where the State Women's Correctional Facility is located. I wonder if she regrets what she did, if she wishes she had just let me keep my mats and moved on with her life. Probably not. People like Barbara do not usually see themselves as the villain. They always think they are right, even when the evidence says otherwise. But that is not my problem anymore. My problem is making sure I have enough salt for the sidewalk, enough firewood for the fireplace, and enough hot chocolate for the long winter nights. Those are good problems to have. The HOA sends out a monthly newsletter now, and it is actually useful. It lists upcoming events, reminds people about trash pickup schedules, and includes a message from Gerald about community updates. Last month, there was a whole section about winter safety tips, including a mention of heated driveway mats as an effective option. I smiled when I read it. Richard, my lawyer, still calls me every few months to check in. He said my case became a bit of a landmark in local HOA law, cited in a few other disputes around the state. Apparently, I am famous in a very niche, very boring way. I will take it. Life is good now. Life is normal. And normal, I have learned, is something worth fighting for. The snow started falling today, the first real storm of the season. Big, fat flakes that stick to everything and make the world look clean and new. I went out to my garage, pulled out the heated mats, and laid them down in the driveway. I plugged them in, and within minutes, the snow started melting. I stood there for a moment, watching the water run off into the gutter, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I won some battle or proved a point, but because I could walk to my car tomorrow morning without worrying about falling. Because I stood up for something that mattered to me, and it worked out. That is all anyone can really ask for. Inside, the house is warm and dinner is waiting. I have a good job, good neighbors, and a safe place to live. I have heated driveway mats that work exactly as advertised. And I have the knowledge that when someone tried to push me around, I pushed back and I won. Not because I am special or brave or any of that. Just because I did not give up. And that is the real story here. Not the HOA drama, not the arrest or the trial or the embezzlement. The real story is that ordinary people can stand up to unfair systems and make a difference. It is not easy and it is not always quick, but it is possible. So if you are reading this and you are dealing with your own Barbara, Your own petty tyrant who thinks the rules are more important than people, I want you to know something. You can fight back. You can win. It might cost you some money sometimes, some stress, but it is worth it. Because at the end of the day, your home is your castle, and no one has the right to make you feel unsafe or unwelcome there. Not an HOA, not a board president, not anyone. Stand up, speak out, and do not back down. That is what I did, and I am glad I did. The mats are humming quietly in the driveway, doing their job, keeping me safe. And that is all I ever wanted.